In today's video, we're going to go over properly exposing images, and I'm going to teach you guys how to get out of automatic mode on your cameras and into manual just like the pros. What's up guys, welcome back to the channel again. If you're new here, my name's Jack Beck, and my goal is to help you new photographers and filmmakers get better quicker by going over all types of gear and technique in these videos. So if you haven't already, make sure you hammer that subscribe button. It really does help this channel keep going. And as always, you can find all of my photography over on Instagram and Twitter at JackBeck360. So now that we've done videos on cameras, lenses, accessories, bags, it's time to gather up all those things and get out there and start shooting. And the easiest way for a new photographer to get familiar with their camera is to throw it in automatic mode and get out there and start shooting away. Automatic mode's decent. What it does is exactly what it says. It automatically picks the best settings for whatever you have framed up. It does a decent job, but in my opinion, automatic mode photos tend to look a little snapshotty, kind of like you took them on a smartphone. So if you really want to up your photography fast and get to that next level, you're going to have to shoot in manual mode. Now manual mode is a lot more complicated and there's a lot more things to tinker with, but the image quality is way better once you get used to it and you know what you're doing. Now in manual mode, you set all of those exposure settings yourself. What this is going to allow you to do is manipulate the shot and make it look the way you want it to look. As an example, you may want to underexpose an image to give it that kind of moody, kind of dark vibe to it. Or you may want to overexpose an image slightly so you get kind of a dreamy feel. The same goes with the depth of field. If you're trying to get that bokeh effect going on where the subject is nice and sharp and the background's blurred out, you're not going to get that in automatic mode. In automatic mode, you're basically going to get a well-exposed flat image. It's going to look nice, but it's not going to have much character to it. That's why learning how to shoot in manual and understanding the exposure triangle is so important to new photographers. The exposure triangle is made up of 3 elements and they all sort of control light in a different way. These 3 elements are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, and these can all be controlled by knobs and buttons on your camera. So all cameras are different as far as how you adjust these. If you don't know how to do it for your particular camera, just take a look in the manual. But how these elements all work together is the same in all of photography. So now let's take a look at these elements so we have a better understanding of what each one does. So the first thing we're going to talk about is aperture. Aperture is basically how much light travels through the lens and hits the sensor. Inside lenses, there's these circular blade patterns that open up and close based on how you set it on your camera. Where aperture can get super confusing for most people is how they measure how open or closed those blades are. It's actually kind of backwards, where the low number actually means that the blades are more open and way more light's going to pass through. Based on that, say we set this to an aperture of f1.8, which is as low as this particular lens can go. That image that it produces is going to be way brighter than say f11. And compared to f22, which is going to be a very small hole, that's going to be super dark. Aperture also affects the depth of field, which is how much of the foreground and the background is in focus compared to your subject, which should always be tack sharp. Let's say we put this lens on the camera and set the aperture all the way down to f1.8. That's going to be great for portraits. Your subject is going to be super tack sharp and the background is going to be blurred out. This is what they call the bokeh or bokeh effect. Think of portrait mode on an iPhone. It really makes your subject pop out of that background. Okay, so let's say we're taking a picture of a group of people instead of just one. You're definitely going to have to raise that aperture so more of the frame's in focus. But when you raise that aperture up, don't forget you're shrinking the hole inside of the lens and it's going to make your image a lot darker than it was before. Same thing with, say you're taking a picture of a landscape, you want to raise up that f-stop number to probably somewhere around f22, and that's going to make your image super dark. But how do we get that brightness back without compromising everything else? We have two options of what we could do here to make this image brighter. One is shutter speed, one is ISO. Let's talk about shutter speed for a minute. Shutter speed is the amount of time that shutter stays open after you hit the button to allow light to hit the sensor. When you use a super fast shutter, you're going to be able to freeze action and have it perfectly sharp. Think of a shark jumping out of the water or a goalie making a glove save. Now when you use a quick shutter like that, just about everything's going to be in focus and it's going to be like you froze that in time. But what if you want to show a little motion in your photo? That's when you would go to a slightly slower shutter speed. When you do that, most of your photo is going to be in focus, but anything that moves around a whole lot is going to have that nice motion blur to it. Now if you're shooting at night or in low light conditions, you almost always have to use a slightly longer shutter just to get enough light in there to get a decently balanced image. But what if you want to do light trails, light paintings, those cool photos where there's a waterfall and it looks like the water's frozen? For these, you're going to need a long exposure. When you do a long exposure, what you're actually doing is keeping that shutter open for 5, 10, 15 seconds, and any light that passes through the frame is going to be burned into the image. Think about a car driving by when you see just the lights, but you don't see the car at all. That's how they do that. Okay, so what if we set our aperture and shutter speed where we want them, and the image is still dark or underexposed? This is where the third element of the exposure triangle comes into play. This is called ISO or ISO. It doesn't matter how you say it. What ISO basically is how sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. When it's too low, you can raise up the ISO or ISO and get basically artificial light added to your photo. There's a pretty good rule of thumb though. You want to keep your ISO as low as possible at all times, because when you start introducing ISO to a photo, you're actually also introducing a lot of digital noise or grain, and this is going to make your photos look way less high quality. ISO should always be used as the last resort if there's no other way to get your image brighter. In fact, ISO should always be in the same spots for different settings. If it's nice and sunny outside, you want that ISO around 100. If it's a little shadier or overcast, probably around 200. If you're shooting inside, it can be anywhere from 400 to 800. And if it's low light or nighttime, you're gonna want to have that ISO around 1600 to 3200. But I wouldn't go usually any higher than that, because then you're going to start getting a ton of that digital noise in your photo. So now that we know the three parts of the exposure triangle and what each one does, now it's time to get out there and start practicing and experimenting. It's that simple to shoot in manual and get better photos. So here's my process for setting up the shots. Once I see something I want to photograph, I try to find a unique angle or composition, and I'm going to have a whole video coming out on photo composition coming out soon, so keep an eye out for that. So once I get everything framed up, then I'll go into my exposure settings into the ISO. I'll set that based on where my subject's at. Don't forget, if it's sunny, 100. If it's shady or overcast, you're going to be around 200. If you're shooting inside, that's going to be around 400, 800. And if it's low light or nighttime photography, you're probably going to be around 1600 or 3200. So after that, I'll go into my aperture settings and adjust that based on what I'm shooting. If I'm doing a portrait with the blurry background, that bokeh effect, I'm going to set my aperture down around 1.8, 2.8. But if I'm shooting something bigger, we're going to raise that up to f11, f16. Then I'll move over to the shutter speed. If I need something super fast, I'll probably be around 1/500th or 1/1000th of a second. That's going to freeze time. If I need to show a little blur, I'm probably going to be around 1/50th or 1/15th of a second. And if I'm doing a long exposure, probably at least 2 seconds. But keep in mind, if you're doing long exposures, you are going to have to put your camera on a tripod or set it on something flat so it's not moving, because anything that moves on that camera, whether you shake it or anything goes through the frame, that's going to show up in the photo. And that's basically how I set up my shots. Sometimes you do have to go back in and readjust something, maybe go one more click, but you're gonna be in the ballpark if you use this method. And that's about it. Get out there and practice now. If this video has helped you, or you have anything else you can add, make sure you put that in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit that like button. But if you want to see more, hit the subscribe. And don't forget to hit that bell notification so you know every time I post new videos to the channel. Also, don't forget to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at JackBeck360. Now it's time for the comment of the week. And this week's comment comes in from Derek's Horror Stuff. Yo, Derek got a dope channel. If you're into horror movies, anything gory like that, check out his channel. He does like product unboxings, reviews, all kinds of creepy stuff like that. Check out his channel. But he said, I dig the channel, man. You're spot on with all of this. I'm always trying to improve my video quality, lighting, editing, etc. I actually find it more fun than actually making the videos. This channel is going to get big, and I'm happy I'll be here to see it. Thanks, Derek, for the words. I truly appreciate them. They let me know that I'm giving you guys a little bit of value, and I'm happy to do it. That's about it this week. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.